Retro.
Are you an aspiring Jedi, or do you dabble with the dark side of the Force?
Regardless of whether you fancy yourself a defender of the light or an aspiring Sith Lord, you're going to need a lightsaber.
Podcast Stardust is pleased to partner with Saber Masters, the creators of high-quality, durable, and affordable lightsabers.
Saber Masters is preparing to launch the Ultimate Lightsaber 2.0, and right now you can get 2 for the price of 1.
So, check out the link in our show notes and go get your Ultimate Lightsabers from Saber Masters.
And don't forget to use our referral code Stardust to save $10 at checkout.
And each purchase using our referral code helps support Podcast Stardust.
Hey, this is Lauren Mary Kim, and I'm the stunt double for Ahsoka Tano in Clone Wars and the armorer in The Mandalorian. You're listening to Dennis and Jay on Podcast Stardust. This is the way.
Hello, and welcome to Podcast Stardust. This is the fully armed and operational podcast dedicated to Star Wars news, reviews, and discussion. I'm Dennis Keithley.
And I'm Jay Krebs.
And it's time to talk some Star Wars news. But first, Jay, where can we be found around the internet?
We are very conveniently found on Instagram, Facebook, and X at Podcast Stardust.
Okay, the dish is aligned, the signal's boosted to maximum output, the shield is down, and we are now broadcasting to the galaxy. So this will be our first news episode in over a month.
Yeah.
And so we've traveled and had to catch up on some of our regular segments, or at least I've traveled, and we've had to catch up on some things once I got back. And frankly, I don't know that there's been a whole lot that's been exceptionally newsworthy out there, but let's just go ahead and get into it. So we don't have anything new to talk about when it comes to the world of movies, but Diego Luna has started talking about the next season of Andor. And I guess it's more appropriate to say he's responding to questions about the next season of Andor as he's been showing up at conventions. And in an article on Popverse, you can find some comments he made about people we're familiar with showing up in season 2. And this came from a panel that happened at the Ace Superhero Comic Con this year. And the quote is, "Rogue One is coming, so there will be characters that you will recognize. There will be cool stuff. For those who love Rogue One, this season is going to be very special. And it's going to be fascinating to go straight to Rogue One after watching the second season, because you will see Rogue One from a different perspective. I promise you that." And elsewhere, apparently one of the producers let slip that Ben Mendelsohn is going to be reprising his role as Director Krennic for Andor. So I've been expecting to hear K2SO is going to show up at some point. I mean, I feel like it would be silly for him not to, but I think having Krennic back is a stroke of genius. What do you think?
Oh, yeah. I mean, that makes total sense, too, especially with where we are in the timeline and where the story can definitely lend itself to having him in there for sure, obviously. So, yeah, that's super exciting.
Yeah. I'm trying to figure out what other characters from Rogue One would make sense to show up other than Director Krennic. I've already seen Saw Gerrera.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I think the one that makes most sense to me is Galen Erso.
Yes, that's exactly what I was going to say. Galen and Lyra, perhaps, especially with the dynamic between the three of them. And, just reading the book Catalyst, of course, really highlights their backstory together. And yeah, I think that would be fantastic. But yeah, K2, I think, is kind of a no-brainer, hopefully. But we'll have to see.
Well, and if this series really does lead right into Rogue One, I don't know how you don't have K2SO in those last couple episodes of the season, because they basically have told us we're going to get, it's going to be 4 years, because we had 5 years before Rogue One, now we're getting the other 4, and it's going to be like a couple episodes per year leading up to that season. So I mean, I feel like we're going to see plenty of Mon Mothma again,
right?
And Saw will return, so those are 2 Rogue One characters right there. I don't know about Darth Vader. I don't know that he needs to show up necessarily. But that's a possibility. Tarkin if they wanted to go that
Mhm.
route, but that would seem to be an expensive add to the show.
Right, right.
So,
Chert and Bays would be another one. Just exploring the Guardians of the Wills, kind of thing.
right. If he has any interaction though, because I got the impression the first time he met them was in Jeddah during the events of the movie.
Right. But I mean, there could still be a little focus on a side story
I suppose.
because there was a lot of, in the first season with Andor being on Narkina 5, I mean, he really didn't have any interaction with the other main characters. And we just kind of saw them doing their thing and then he was doing his thing.
Sure, but they all eventually ended up in the same place. Uh,
Right.
right there. So,
Eventually.
so
Hmm.
we'll see. I mean, it's possible. Well, I don't know. I'm just for me, those two rank less likely
Hmm.
than and I wouldn't expect to see Jen at all.
No, I hate to say
Uh,
it, but I
yeah.
don't I don't think so. Unless they get a different actress, which I suppose is possible, but
hmm I mean, if we're gonna see Jen, it's gonna be well. What would it be? I mean, because you would, to your point. I mean, how old was she in Rogue One? Not very old, like
mhm,
21 or something like that.
mhm.
And
Mm.
so they need a 16-year-old if they're, or 17-year-old or something like that if they're going to put her in early. And I just don't know that that's entirely necessary. We've got her backstory up to this point elsewhere.
Right. Isn't
So
that Rebel
yeah,
Rising, the book?
yeah, hmm yeah. So, anyways, season 2 of Andor is expected sometime in 2025, and I'm guessing summer, but we don't have anything for certain on that.
Right.
All right. In other television related news, the soundtrack for the first 4 episodes of The Acolyte is now available on streaming platforms. I've been listening to it for the last few days on and off while I've been doing work. This was composed by Michael Abels. Have you had a chance to check it out, Jay?
No, I didn't realize that it had been released. I knew it was coming,
hmm
but I'm definitely gonna have to check it out for sure. What are your thoughts? What are your overall impressions?
I like it. It's a lot more subtle than what you come to expect from something like from John Williams. Now, that being said, it reminds me of a lot of John Williams. I don't know how to explain it, like the transitional music, kind of the quieter music that might be in the background at times, as opposed to Duel of the Fates, or
Mhm.
one of the big bombastic pieces that is dominates the movies. And I, I'm not. I don't have any real issues with this. It's perfectly good music. It's just that it's not. Yeah, like in comparison to John Williams, it's just not quite as brash and
Mhm.
bombastic. I guess someone use that word again. It's just not as quite as loud as in your face is what he does. But it works for the show, and it's been something that's been uh, nice to have on while working. It's not distracting, if you know what I mean.
Oh, yeah. Well, cool. I'll definitely have to check it out. Yeah, because prior to this, I hadn't really been super knowledgeable about Michael Abel's work. I mean, we
hmm
talked about a couple of his movies, Get Out, and what was the other one? Nope. And there was a couple other ones too. But so yeah, I'm very interested in this.
Yeah, I'm not entirely certain what I was expecting because I hadn't seen any of those movies,
Right.
so it
I
just
haven't
wasn't.
either.
Yeah, I was just not familiar with his work at all, same as you. But I just, but when you get a Star Wars movie, I feel like regardless of the composer is, there's a lot of expectations for the music,
Oh,
and
for sure.
and this is a new movie, a Star Wars project, I should say. But Kevin Kiner, what he's done with Clone Wars and Rebels and Ahsoka, and then what we've seen from Ludwig Göransson and The Mandalorian, those have all been like real standout composers for this. And maybe it's just because I don't have the familiarity with it yet, but I'm just not getting the big standout pieces from the
Hmm.
score this time
Hmm.
around.
That's fair.
Yeah, it's not bad. It's just that, even Michael Giacchino in Rogue One, I mean, shoot, we use that music as our theme music for
Right.
for a couple hundred episodes or several hundred episodes and stuff like that. And I feel like that was much more distinct. And this is, like I said,
Mhm.
it's fine. It's just that I'm not. If you asked me to name what my favorite track is, I couldn't do it because it's. I at no point while I've been listening have I just like, oh, what's the name of that track? I have to check that out, mark that one.
Uh-huh.
Now there have been like when I've had it up in front of me, I was like, okay, I could remember that because there's one track right off the top which is called Alone Assassin, which is from the very beginning of the first episode. And it's like, yeah, I can remember that.
Hmm.
That seems right. I could picture what's going on while that was happening. And I also haven't really sat here and tried to figure this out, but I kind of get the feeling that not all of these tracks are in the order they appear in the show.
Okay. Yeah, that
Just
kind of makes it hard to place in your mind
yeah,
as well if
I
you're
mean,
trying
just
to
look,
follow along.
yeah, because like the first ones are a lone assassin, the noodle shop fight, meet OSHA, and next space one. Okay, that seems all very much up for episode one, but and then I guess maybe it's because of some of these titles like taken into custody. Well, that happens a couple times in the
Mhm.
show,
Yeah.
and so there's oh maybe they are now that I'm looking at it closer. But there's been a few times where I've been confused as to necessarily where we were on this. But yeah, I guess I take that back. Maybe they are in order looking at it closer. But when you aren't following the tracks as they're playing the titles, and you look up and it's like, wait a minute, weren't we just on the tracks from episode 2? And
Mm.
this seems to come from 4. I don't know. But all right. Well, that was a confusing and thoroughly unhelpful discussion of the music, but we'll move on from there. In books and comics news, this is pretty huge. Both the Star Wars and Darth Vader titles are coming to an end with issue 50 of their current run. And Star Wars is currently being written by Charles Soule. Darth Vader is written by Greg Pak. We've talked about some of those issues on the podcast. We really strayed away from that. It's been a long time since we talked about it.
Mhm.
Star Wars ends on September 11th, and Darth Vader ends on September 18th. And then Marvel's been teasing that later this year, they're going to take readers to a different era of the galaxy far, far away. So, at least for the moment, when those two titles end in September, Star Wars is not going to have any ongoing titles
Wow.
because they have, the High Republic has been maxi series, basically about 10 to 12 issues each. We've been getting a number of miniseries recently. Yoda's come to an end. Bounty Hunter's come to an end. Afra's come to an end recently. So yeah, it'll be kind of a new era for Star Wars comics later this year.
Yeah, it really will be because that's a lot of titles that are wrapping up that a lot of people really do wait for, every week or whenever they happen to come out.
Yeah, I mean, I was reading all of their titles when they came out in 2015 as they came out, and
Mhm.
then over the years, I just started to fall behind because they went from having Star Wars and Darth Vader to Star Wars, Darth Vader, and a Princess Leia miniseries, and then they just kept adding stuff. Then there was a Kanan series for a little while, and then
Oh, I remember that. Mhm.
there was a Chewbacca miniseries, and they were doing a lot of those type. And then there was a Poe Dameron ongoing series that Charles Soule wrote that was really pretty good as well. And then before you knew it, there was 6, 7 issues of Star Wars coming every month, and that was a lot. And I was also reviewing all of them for RetroZap at the time, so I just
Oh,
had
yeah.
trouble
You
keeping
had
up
your
with
hands
that.
full.
Yeah, and so eventually I just was not keeping up. And now what'll happen is that through Marvel Unlimited, I'll read a bunch all at once, but I'm still way behind on both these titles. I think I'm around issues 20 or 25 on both of them, and then they all have crossovers, which makes things complicated. And I know they just had the Dark Droids event, so I need to go back and check
Mhm.
that one out as well.
Well,
But
yeah. Do you
yeah,
think that's one of the reasons why they're wrapping these titles up is just to kind of let people catch up with all of them? Because that is a lot. I mean, that you think about everything that you just listed, that's a huge commitment right there.
I honestly think they just ran out of space for storytelling in
Ah,
in those eras because the current runs take place between The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, and that's what, a
mhm,
year,
mhm,
and you're getting 50 issues out of that. And
mhm,
how many other stories have been written in that time period as well? So I
mhm,
mean, at some point, it's just a saturated time span.
mhm. That's
And so
fair.
I don't know what else you could do. And if they ever want to do more novels there, well, you're kind of putting constraints on what can be told with these characters
Right.
based on all these comics. So here's the question I have for you. I know you aren't as an avid comic reader as I've been in the past, but we've talked about a lot of comics. You've read a lot of them. What would you like to see them do next? At what time period? What era? Any particular characters that you'd like to see them focus on?
Well, I think it would be fun to do something with the Inquisitors, kind of a bounce off of the Tales of the Empire, kind of
Hmm.
thing, and sort of the origin stories of things like that, perhaps. And then, we're going to be talking about The Living Force by John Jackson Miller. And that book really was kind of a comfort book in a
Mhm.
lot of ways. And just some of those adventures, just expanding on the adventures of the Jedi during that time period. It's obviously that one was right before the Phantom Menace, like a year or so. But there you could keep going backwards just a little bit because that was fun to explore. I think that would be fun. And maybe even something with Padme, just a very specific Padme centric kind of a thing. I know we have the novels by E.K. Johnston, but that would be fun to see in a graphic novel kind of a thing. So just off the
Mhm.
top of my head, those are just a few, but do you have anything that you'd like to see?
I wouldn't mind the adventures of Obi-Wan and Anakin between the Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones. That's
Oh
like a
yeah.
10-year period right there that they could do all kinds of stuff with. I mean, the Clone Wars era is also very saturated, not just from the show, but with other comics and things that have happened there. You could always stand more stories that take place after Return of the Jedi. We've already had the marriage of Han Solo and Princess Leia, the Princess and the Scoundrel, but other stories, they've been giving us those on occasion. We got to see the rise of Kylo Ren, another
Hmm.
Charles Soule story there, and things like that happen. But that's a big era of time between Return of the Jedi and The Force Awakens. It's like what, 26 years or so, something like that.
Hmm.
A lot of things happened that
Yeah,
could be. You could have Tales of the Imperial Remnant set in that period.
that'd be fun.
I would also like to see a post Rise of Skywalker series, but I don't feel like they're going to do that until we get the next movie with Rey in it,
I would agree.
and then they can start to then, because I don't think they want to do anything on a comic or a book that is going to impact their ability to tell a story through the movie. And it's not going to be until maybe they have that movie or movies, if they make any sequels to it, established, that then they start to go back and give us some of that connective tissues and that, because I guess they're talking about a 10-year gap between The Rise of Skywalker and the new Jedi Order movie.
Mhm.
So be plenty of time to fill the stories then as well.
Yeah, yeah. They could also do The Adventures of Basil the Tracker. Ha ha
Yeah, right.
ha.
Um, Another idea that occurs to me is, on one of the most recent timelines that they put out there, they did put a Old Republic stamp on the
Mm,
timeline, and we currently have no canon stories
that's
from there.
true. That is very
So
true.
that would seem to be another era that they could flesh out. And I wouldn't mind more comics from the High Republic time period. Give us some more stories of like Stellan Gius before all this happened, like when he was in his prime and some of his missions, and you know, um, maybe him and his Padawan Vernestra Rowe doing stuff.
Mm, mhm, mhm.
Or once Phase 3 is over, there's going to be about 100 years until the Acolyte. That would be, primary to tell more stories.
Oh,
Just
yeah,
because the conflict with the Nile and Marchion Row is going to be coming to an end doesn't mean that all these characters, or whatever ones survive, necessarily have to have their stories end as well. We can learn more about them going forward.
right. I just kinda figured that we would get more High Republic, so that's why I didn't really go into that one, but I just sort of assumed, and maybe that's not a good thing to assume, but, you know. You know what
Yeah.
else I'm thinking too? Like, I'm
Hmm.
sitting here looking at my books, and it would be fun to have a Phasma, just, like, even if it's just a one shot. I just think that would be cool because that book by Delilah Dawson was so good.
She actually had a comic miniseries.
Did she?
Yeah. And now
How
that
did
you've
I
said
not
that you
know
haven't
that?
read it, we're going to have to cover it.
Oh, okay. There we go. Spoke it
Yeah.
into existence. Let's do
Hmm.
it.
Yeah. And then she also got in oh, when was it? It was a couple years ago. They did the Age of the Republic, Age of Rebellion, and Age of Resistance. So, 3 different timelines, and they told like 4 light side and 4 dark side stories in each one of them. And when they got to Age of Resistance, there was a Phasma one shot in there as well.
Cool.
So, okay, yeah, okay. Well, I'm putting that on the list. We're going to definitely do
Thanks.
the Phasma. I like that story an awful lot, and I think it really dives into who she was right around the time of The Force Awakens. So I don't
Awesome.
want to say any more than that, so I don't spoil it for you.
I'm here for it.
Yeah, look for that on Podcast Stardust coming soon.
Yay.
Okay. Well, then the last story we've got for this week's news is that we have a new Haslab product from Hasbro. And this one is the Vintage Collection Mos Eisley Cantina. And, if you're thinking Haslab sounds familiar and you can't quite place it, this is the ongoing effort that gave us the Razor Crest, Jabba's sail barge. One of their previous projects was the Rancor, which failed to fund. And then the Inquisitor lightsaber was another one that failed to fund as well. But this is a playset from Star Wars: A New Hope. It is the Mos Eisley Cantina. And it is, I don't know how to describe it. It's like I said, it's just a playset. It's got the bar. It's got several of the booths. It's got the entryway. There's two different versions if you can get this. There is the standard and the deluxe version. Neither one of them are cheap. The standard version is $400. The deluxe version is $500. The deluxe version basically comes with additional walls and some booths to make a larger playset area if you're so interested in this. It also comes with a number of action figures. The first one is who is the bartender at the Mos Eisley Cantina. And then for the first time ever, we are getting action figures for the Tonica sisters. Apparently there's been name, image, likeness issues with those two forever. And so that's why we've never had action figures for them, but they'll be coming with this.
That's cool.
In order for this to get produced, they need 8,000 backers by July 9th. As of the time we were recording this, they have, drumroll please, 6,184. There is also a number of stretch goals. If it gets to 11,000 backers, there will be a Greedo action figure included that'll come with a new sculpt. So I'm not all that current on Greedo action figures, so I couldn't tell you what's different on that one. Then we'll have, for 14,000 backers, there is Nabrin Leeds. And at 17,000 backers, then there'll be Abelil Skosh. I'm not sure how you pronounce his last name. Schous. And that's kind of a Wolfman looking character from the Cantina. So
I had to look those up because I didn't know who they were by name.
Yeah. Fortunately, they had that information for me on the Haslab site. I'm not going to back this because I just don't do these things. I don't have the room for them. They're very cool. I'm not a big action figure collector, so the opportunity to get these rare figures doesn't really mean much to me. But I can't deny it's kind of cool looking. But what do you think?
Oh, it's very cool. And at least we know this one's not going to blow up like the other things have done, literally, in the timeline. But it's funny because, you'd said that 6,184 backers. I have the website up as you were talking about it, and I opened it up when we started doing the notes, and they actually gained 4 backers just in that time. So it's doing pretty well. But it's just cracking me up because the were is that how you pronounce the bartender's name?
Yeah.
Were. He has his action figure set up to where his one hand is pointing. So whether he is holding his gun or whether he is pointing at no droids kind of thing. We don't allow their kind in here. You can pose him to where he's pointing his one finger at, whatever you want to do. But I also like the fact that you get this whole sticker sheet of things, and it's got like graffiti and it's got different posters of like, Figure and Dan and the modal nodes kind of thing. And then all these people that have appeared there at the cantina, and some wanted posters of different criminals. And, there's even, again, the no droids sign there. And so you can really customize it the way that you want. And there's even a sabacc table sticker that you can use. So I think that's kind of fun. I mean, just for the kid in all of us to be able to do something very detailed like that, and bring that home for the collector that is really interested in that. And they even have it's almost like playing like a tea set too, because there's a bunch of stools and furniture and modular booths. There's like cups and wall decor, all kinds of fun stuff you can do.
Yeah. I have a feeling this will fund because
I think so
with
too.
over 10 days to go, or like 11 or 12 at this point, It's pretty close, and it'll probably pick up a lot of steam there right at the end. I think a lot of these stretch goals are out of reach, and I wouldn't be surprised if it did lose some backers because it's not going to reach those stretch goals. I know someone who said that they funded it, but they were going to cancel their order if it doesn't reach those stretch goals because at this price they feel like that's the only way it's worth the value. And on them, and this really is not cheap. $400 just for the basic version, and
Right.
$500 for the deluxe. That's a lot. But hey, it's I think back to the original Mos Eisley playset from back in the late 70s, early 80s, and it was just kind of like a piece of that bar and a lot of cardboard on
Yes.
this. So how far things have come over the years.
It's so true. And I mean, it's a really cool set, but it is big, like you said. And if you've already got a lot of things collected, where do you set it up? But yeah, it's definitely worth checking out, if nothing else, just to look at the pictures, and because it is very detailed and it is a very, very nice piece. It's a very nice looking piece. But if anybody wants to get in on it, they're going to have to make a decision pretty quick because it's going to stop backing on July 8th. So you got 1 week.
Indeed. Okay, well then, I think that'll do it for this week's edition of Star Wars News. Thank you all for joining us for this episode of Podcast Stardust. We hope you've enjoyed it, and if so, make sure you hit the subscribe button on your podcatcher of choice, and you'll get our weekly look at the news at this point from Mondays, since we have the Acolyte going on, and then later on Fridays when we don't have an active Disney Plus show. I'd also like to remind you that you can find the entire catalog of shows over on retrozap.com, which is also home to a bunch of other great podcasts on the network. The shows like Enjoy Stuff, the Animaniacast, the Dooncast, and others are there for the taking. And as always, we greatly appreciate your 5-star ratings and reviews on whatever podcatcher it is that you use to get your podcasts, especially if that's Apple Podcasts. We love sharing those reviews on the show. We haven't had any for a little while, so hey, if you got something you want to share with us, let us know, and we'll read it on the next episode of the news once we get it. So speaking of new reviews and social media and the like, Jay, you want to remind everybody where we can be found on social media and elsewhere around the internet?
You got it, Dennis. We are very easily and conveniently found on Instagram, Facebook, and X at Podcast Stardust. And we are also on all of the different listening platforms and streaming platforms, such as Spotify, and Dennis mentioned Apple Music, Apple Podcasts, and we also have our YouTube and YouTube Music outlets as well. So head over to both of those, like, subscribe, share those out, and those also support reviews. So we would love it if you would do that for us as well. And we do have a Pinterest page with lots and lots of boards, and you can connect with us on Discord. The link to that will be in our show notes. So if you want to get in on some real-time chatter, you can head over there. And if you'd like to support the show, there's a couple different ways you can do that. One is by heading over to TeePublic. So if you are in need of a t-shirt, a tank top, a tote bag for the beach, a coffee mug, anything to sport the Podcast Stardust logo, we have 7 of them to choose from. So the link to that will be in our show notes as well. And every purchase does help to support the show. And another purchase that helps support the show and your lightsaber habit is by heading over to Saber Masters. So if you are in the market for a lightsaber, there are some awesome battle ready sabers over there just waiting for you to add to cart. And if you do happen to get anything, make sure you add the code Stardust at checkout, and that will also earn you an extra $10 off of your purchase. And Podcast Stardust gets a little bit from that as well. So once again, the link to that will be in our show notes. So with that, Dennis, do you have anything going on with Warp Trails or any other recording or podcasts coming up?
So at the moment, no. Still trying to get back on schedule. There's a lot going on with work after vacation. And so sometime soon, we'll be getting a wrap-up episode from Season 5 of Discovery over on Warp Trails, which I guess I should mention is the Star Trek podcast hosted by myself and my wife, Beth. That's exclusive to the Wretches App podcast feed. So be on the lookout for that. And we are eagerly awaiting the debut of Season 5 of Lower Decks, and then we'll be covering that as well. So what is the latest in the world of cosplay, Jay?
Well, you can always find me on my Instagram, which is at j.snipscosplay. And I did have a couple of appearances back in the beginning part of June. So if you'd like to check those out, I did get a chance to appear as Hera. And also, you can catch me as Ahsoka and Hera from the Ahsoka series as well as the Fourth Sister Inquisitor, my original concept Mandalorian, which I'm still having a ton of fun with, and my new High Fae Queen, which is a lot of fun. And you never know what else you're going to find. So it's a lot of fun, a great community. So once again, head on over to j.snipscosplay.
All right, so upcoming on the show on Wednesday, we will be discussing John Jackson Miller's The Living Force. And then on Friday, we'll be discussing the 6th episode of The Acolyte. So with that, thanks for listening to episode 749 of Podcast Stardust, everyone. Have a great week. And until next time, may the Force be with you.